Happy Monday. I realize that it may not be Monday um, when I post this, or I guess when you see it. So I hope you're having good, whatever day it is for you. It was a hot one today. It was kind of a scorcher, but I spent most of my time inside, so it wasn't too bad. It's also a little bit strange. I've worked nights for the last 2.5 years, so getting back home when the sun was still up, it's kind of a little interesting. Um, I feel like we definitely sort of get stuck in sort of certain habits, and sort of breaking that is a bit of like your world sort of shifting completely. But it's new, and new is good sometimes. So I'm sort of just taking that as it is, and it's honestly been pretty good so far. It's been kind of nice, sort of to be up a little bit earlier than I have been for the last 2.5 years. Um, but onto something completely different. I've been thinking a little bit more about grief recently, and there wasn't anything that sort of necessarily happened, but I feel like as you get older, you start sort of wrestling with this idea of your own mortality. And I think, sort of, as you get older and as you observe the people around you physically and sometimes mentally, sort of getting older as well, it can sort of bring on sort of this onset of sort of emotions. I think for most people, I mean, I can't speak for all of them, but I feel like your parents are a big proponent of this. Sort of as you see them visibly, turning into who they are now or who they're becoming, it can definitely, sort of bring about those feelings. I think sort of having older parents as well, which I feel like sort of as the generations have been going on, people have been having children later and later. It's something that we've been seeing quite a bit more. Um, but the concept of grief, I suppose, has always been a little bit far out there for me. See, there's this, of course, this idea of death, and what happens after, which, depending on, different religious viewpoints and sort of your own personal idea, you're going to have a pretty unique sort of idea of what happens with death and what happens after. But grief, on the other hand, is sort of what's left over. It's for the living, after, say, like a passing of a loved one. Grief, um, grief is sort of what transcends beyond death. And I listened to this absolutely phenomenal album by Steven Wilson Jr. It's called Son of Dad, and on top of being just an overall great album musically, it's sort of this blend of different genres in the heart can are in the heartland, very sort of Mellencamp like, but with elements of rock and grunge, and some really stellar sort of storytelling, very Jason Isbell esque in a way, songwriting. Um, but beyond that, it's sort of the story. It sort of narrates Stephen as he's sort of dealing with the emotions and the passing of his father. There's a song on the album. It's called "Grief Is Only Love," and the line that starts off the chorus goes, "Grief is only love that's got no place to go." And I think that's sort of the perfect type of description for this type of emotion that's sort of left after the passing of a loved one. And if you ever get the chance to sort of see him live, I highly recommend it. He's a hell of a performer, and he'll take you on sort of quite the roller coaster of emotions. Now, Intermezzo, which is this book right here. Um, I'm currently in the middle of it. It's a pretty good read, but it details the lives of sort of two brothers as they're dealing with the passing of their father, and sort of the ways that they deal with it. And I think it's one of the most realistic depictions of that sort of love that's left over that I've read recently. And the author, Sally Rooney, she has this sort of stream of consciousness type of writing that I became sort of accustomed to with Jack Kerouac, and sort of this jazz like ensemble of stringing together sort of thoughts and scenes to move the story forward. And it's very readable, which I can appreciate, especially when tackling certain subjects like death and grief. But the overarching idea of grief has sort of been associated with the dead, and I think there's also certain elements that sort of fall into more of this gray area, sort of in the way that you can grieve someone that is still alive, or you can grieve sort of a certain part of your life, whether that's a part of yourself or sort of some element in your life along the way. Now, I'm a fan of taking a look sort of at different philosophies on certain subjects. But as far as death and grief is concerned, there seems to be, at least for me, one of the larger disconnects in the sort of way that we connect with sort of that or certain ideologies and literature of certain philosophers. Obviously, not everything is going to be for everyone, and we all view things differently. But I personally found it difficult to relate, for the lack of a better word, to the concept of death as described or embellished really by Socrates. See, for Socrates, death was defined as nothing that was necessarily good or bad, but rather just an expected outcome. Really, one of the few definite truths about life. All life ends with death. If you have life, you will also have death. It's simply rather an unknown. No one knows sort of what happens physically here anyway. I mean, obviously people have their own beliefs about it. I'm not going to knock any sort of viewpoints towards that. But simply taking the idea that it is an unknown, he leads into saying that fear of the unknown is irrational. Sort of in this regard, then, the death of a loved one isn't one to be mocked up to misfortune, and the resulting lament and grief is also then irrational. At one point, I'm sure, I could have wholeheartedly assumed some level of agreement, and there are certain elements that I personally do, but the idea that grief itself is irrational isn't one that I've necessarily sort of come to terms with. Maybe I will at some point, maybe, but for now, I'm just not there. He also said that the grief should only be left to women, and not even to women who are good for anything. So you can also sort of take that as you will. No, that's not to say that there aren't sort of other thinkers that have viewpoints that I personally align with. I'd say maybe a little bit more, and Heidegger is one of those that sort of have imparted meaningful takeaways, and one of those impartations is just how profound grief, or even just the thought of the death of a loved one, lays bare to just how much meaning they give the world. And I think that's sort of a sweet thought, that the pure thought of losing someone shows how much of an effect they have on the world, or at least your world. And in his consolation to Helvia, Seneca said that in the realm of grief, it is therefore better to conquer it rather than to cheat it. It's in a way this sort of perverse idea that to deceive grief through excessive pleasure or through business is sort of far out of sight, because it's always going to return. And when it returns, it will have rested, so that it comes back stronger, leading to a more terrible attack. Now, I personally think the relation directly translates to the level of emotion. The most rational way for grief to sort of travel through a profound relationship or a profound relation is through sort of this profound level of emotion. What you choose to do with your emotions is up to you, but that answer has to come from you. It has to come from within. And I think the most important part is sort of not to hide it away, but rather to acknowledge it. And in that, sort of love is always going to find, the love that's left over is always going to find a way to redirect itself. And in stifling that very grief, you stifle that growth that is necessary for you to move forward. So with that, I'll leave you with this. A life with grief is not a curse, but rather a reminder to treasure what you have, to treasure what you love, and to treasure what you hold dear, because one day we will all be gone. All right, that's all I got. That is grief, love, and all of the above.